I stood frozen as the sheriff hammered an eviction notice onto my door, the HOA president grinning smugly beside him. They'd taken my land through backroom deals and corruption, unaware that my father's badge outranked their schemes. What would their expressions be when they realized the police chief was about to dismantle their carefully planned land grab? "Get those hideous vegetables out of my view." Linda screeched over the fence, her polished nails digging into the wood until her knuckles turned white. I glanced up from my kneeling spot, dirt still clinging to my fingers, puzzled by her outburst. "These tomato plants are on my property, Linda," I said evenly, wiping sweat from my brow. "They're not bothering anyone." "They're an eyesore, Mark," she spat. "I didn't pay a fortune for this house to stare at your farmer's market reject pile." I stood, brushing soil off my jeans. This wasn't our first clash over my garden, but Linda's fury seemed sharper today. Her flawless auburn hair barely shifted as she trembled with rage. "The HOA rules say I can grow vegetables in my backyard," I replied, keeping my tone steady despite my growing irritation. "Rules can change," she snapped, then stormed back into her sprawling mansion. I returned to my plants, trying to shrug off her threat. My garden was my sanctuary after grueling workdays. When Mom died last year, tending these vegetables, grown from seeds she'd saved, became my therapy. I wasn't about to ditch them because Linda craved a prettier Instagram backdrop. The next morning, a garish yellow notice was jabbed into my lawn. "Property violation. Unauthorized garden extension." I ripped it free, scanning the absurd claim that my garden stretched 3 feet into community land. Across the street, Ethan watched me, worry etched on his face. He jogged over, casting a nervous glance at Linda's house. "They did it," he whispered. "Paul called an emergency HOA meeting last night. Only his cronies were invited. They can't just redraw my property line overnight," I said, hands shaking with anger. "There's more," Ethan continued, voice dropping. "I overheard Paul on the phone with Sheriff Daniels yesterday. Something about making the problem property available and generous campaign donations." My stomach sank. Paul, the HOA president, had tentacles all over Oakwood Hills. Sheriff Daniels' re-election signs dotted every yard, including a massive one at Paul and Linda's place. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, stuffing the notice into my pocket. Inside, I dug out my property deed. My garden was clearly within my lines. I snapped photos of the plants and markers, then emailed them to the HOA with a sharp rebuttal. Their reply pinged back instantly. "The board has reviewed updated surveys. Your documents are outdated. Correct the violation within 48 hours or face penalties." I called my lawyer right away. While waiting for his response, a huge truck rolled up outside. Uniformed men spilled out, heading for my garden. I bolted out. "Stop. What are you doing?" Paul emerged from behind the truck, clipboard in hand, smirking. "Enforcing HOA violations, per the covenant you signed. You can't just take my land," I protested, stepping between the workers and my plants. "Actually, we can," Paul said, his thin smile chilling me. "It's not your land anymore. The updated survey says it's community property." "What updated survey? I was never notified." "It was in the newsletter," he sneered. "Not my fault you don't keep up." My phone buzzed. My lawyer. "Don't let them touch anything. I'm on my way." "My lawyer says you need to leave," I told Paul, forcing confidence. He laughed. "Your lawyer can talk to Sheriff Daniels. He's fully aware of this." Right on cue, a patrol car pulled up. Sheriff Daniels stepped out, thumbs in his belt loops, nodding to Paul before approaching me. "We've had complaints about a disturbance," he drawled, though no one had called. "They're trying to steal my property." I showed him my deed. "This is illegal." He barely glanced at it. "Looks like an HOA matter. They've got authority." Behind him, workers started yanking out my tomato plants, tossing Mom's legacy into trash bags. Linda watched from her window, phone in hand, likely filming my disgrace for the neighborhood chat. "Those plants are special," I begged. "At least let me move them." "Should have thought of that before breaking rules," Paul said, ticking off his clipboard. Something snapped inside me. I hadn't called Dad for help since moving here. He'd taught me to stand on my own, but with Daniels clearly in Paul's pocket, I knew I needed backup. I retreated inside as the workers trashed my garden, dialed Dad with trembling hands. "It's me. I need you. You always said to know when a fight's too big." "I'm there." What's happened? His voice carried the weight of 15 years as Riverbend County's police chief. The HOA's seizing my land. They've bribed the sheriff. They're destroying Mom's garden now. Silence hung heavy. Take pictures. Record everything. Don't sign anything. I'll be there tomorrow. When I hung up, an email popped up, Community Improvement Project announcement. It outlined plans for enhancements on several properties, including the chunk they were stealing, complete with a rendering of luxury condos replacing our homes. I stared, stunned. This wasn't about my garden. They wanted my whole property. Outside, Sheriff Daniels shook Paul's hand before driving off. The workers had finished, staking out a new property line that swallowed a quarter of my yard. Ethan lingered nearby, pretending to admire their work while snapping covert photos. Our eyes met through the window. He gave a faint nod before slipping away. I looked at Dad's contact on my phone. Paul, Linda, and Daniels had no idea who they'd targeted. Tomorrow, they'd find out, and this petty garden spat would blow up in their faces. But tonight, I had digging to do. If they wanted to fight, I'd arm myself. Is your dad really the police chief? Ethan whispered the next morning as we huddled in my kitchen. Through the window, Paul directed a surveyor planting more stakes in my yard. 20 years in law enforcement, 15 as chief in Riverbend. I confirmed, sliding my laptop over. Check what I found last night. Ethan's eyes widened at the documents. Property assessments, zoning requests. Wait, is that Paul's signature on a development contract? I nodded grimly. The HOA's not just after my garden. They're forcing out half the neighborhood for a big deal. The doorbell rang, startling us. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery guy with a large envelope from my lawyer. Legal papers already? Ethan asked as I signed for it. I tore it open, a cease and desist order claiming I was meddling in HOA business by documenting them, threatening a lien on my house. They can't do that, Ethan protested. They shouldn't, I agreed. But look who signed it. Ethan peered at the name, Sheriff Daniels. He can't enforce HOA rules like this. He can if they've duped a judge into validating their new lines, I said, sinking into a chair. My lawyer says we need to counterfile, but that'll take weeks. A big SUV rolled into my driveway. My heart lifted as Dad stepped out, still in his chief's uniform, his sharp gaze sweeping the scene. Don't tell anyone who he is yet, I whispered to Ethan. We need to figure out their full game first. Dad strode in without knocking, filling the kitchen with his presence. He hugged me briefly, then eyed the papers strewn across my table. Ethan's been helping, I explained. He lives across the street. Dad nodded to Ethan, then turned to me. Show me everything. Start to finish. For an hour, we laid it out. The garden fight, the sudden survey shifts, the sheriff's role, the condo plans I'd uncovered. Classic land grab, Dad concluded, his face darkening. They're using the HOA as a front for a real estate scam. Why target me first? I asked. Corner lots are gold for developers, he said. Yours gives them dual street access. Plus, you're alone here. No family nearby. Except they didn't count on me. Noise outside pulled our attention. Paul argued with the surveyor, jabbing at a map, then my house. Something's off with their plan, Ethan noted. Dad's phone buzzed. He checked it, a faint smile forming. My team ran checks on Paul, Linda, and Daniels. Interesting ties. Paul worked for Crestview Developers 6 years ago, the same outfit behind those condo plans. And Daniels' campaign treasurer? Paul's brother-in-law. A knock interrupted us. I peeked out, Paul, flanked by 2 suited men. Don't say who I am, Dad whispered, tucking away his badge. Let's hear them out. I opened the door cautiously, blocking the entry. Can I help you? Paul's fake smile didn't reach his eyes. We need to discuss your property, urgent. My lawyer says no talks without him, I replied. This isn't optional, Paul said, smile fading. These gentlemen from Crestview Developers need to inspect your foundation. One suit stepped forward. We're concerned about structural issues affecting nearby homes. You need a court order, I said firmly. Actually, the second suit chimed in. The HOA covenant allows entry for safety checks, Section 8, Paragraph 4. Dad loomed behind me. That applies to common areas, not private homes. I've read your covenant closely. Paul's eyes narrowed. And you are? A family friend, helping with repairs, Dad said smoothly. Paul studied him, then pressed on. Whatever, we need access today. No, I said flatly. Then Sheriff Daniels will escort us in, Paul threatened. On what grounds? Dad asked. Obstructing a safety inspection, Paul snapped. Interesting, Dad mused. Does the sheriff often enforce civil HOA disputes over actual laws? Paul's face reddened. Who are you, really? Before Dad could reply, a news van pulled up. A reporter and cameraman stepped out, scanning the street. What's this? Paul muttered, rattled. Ethan appeared near the crew, pointing my way. The reporter nodded, heading over. You called the news? I asked Dad, stunned. No, he said, but Ethan's got sharp instincts. The reporter approached, mic ready. I'm Lisa Hart from Channel 5. We got a tip about homeowners being pushed out for development. Care to comment? I glanced at Dad, who nodded subtly. I'd love to show you what's happening, I said. For 20 minutes, I walked Lisa through it, the garden dispute, the fake surveys, the condo plans. The camera caught the stakes, the ruined garden, the cease and desist. Who approved these property shifts? Lisa asked. Sheriff Daniels, I said. Oddly, his campaign got a big donation from the HOA's special fund last month. Lisa's brows shot up. Got proof? I nodded. Plenty. Linda stormed over, furious. You can't talk to the media. That's against HOA rules. Free speech isn't HOA regulated, Dad said mildly. Lisa turned to Linda. Care to comment on claims the HOA's seizing land for a development deal? Linda paled. That's nonsense. We're just enforcing standards. Then you won't mind us checking your financials, Dad said. You need a warrant. Daniels barked, finding his voice. Dad smiled. Got one yesterday from the State Financial Crimes Unit. They'll be here soon. Neighbors murmured as a black SUV with state markings arrived. Two stern suits stepped out. Paul's confidence crumbled. He whispered to Linda, who pulled away, shrieking, "This is your mess." Maybe take this downtown, Dad suggested, nodding to the investigators. As Daniels, Paul, and Linda were led to separate cars, Lisa turned to me. Your side of the story? The weight eased off my shoulders. Neighbors gathered, some apologizing, others sharing their own HOA woes. But as Paul was loaded into a cruiser, his glare promised this wasn't over.